Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. I am sitting here with Dillon Mysliwiec. Dillon is an engineer turned entrepreneur who specializes in brand development, digital marketing, and storytelling, with ventures including Marketing ADD for business growth, Sierra Nova Comics for immersive publishing, and the Upstate Sound Music Group. Inspired by mentors like Tim Ferriss and Gary Vaynerchuk, he channels his passion for continuous self-improvement, adaptability, and creativity into helping others thrive in an ever-evolving marketplace. Dillon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. How
Well,
are you
thank you,
doing?
thank you for being here. We do have some interesting things to cover, but before we do that, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today was, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most, and why?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was trying to think of a couple different responses. One of the first ones that came to mind was Double D from Ed, Ed, and Eddie, who was the second Ed. And it was just funny because I grew up in a family of five, and it, it I I haven't I've always been like the one doing well in school, but then ironically got to college and like did terrible. But ever since then, something we chatted about before is I read an immense amount of books to the point where my own mom asks me for advice and that kind of stuff, which is like an interesting turn. Like when you're like, oh wow, that was the first time that occurred. Like that was very cool. But it's a goofy kind of thing where Double D's in between. This guy who's always got plans, and then this guy's just an idiot, but he always wants to be involved with that group. And it's funny because that's kind of where I do find myself sometimes, where like I'm working with people who are always trying to do stuff, but they're always stumbling over themselves, and I'm always trying to like pick it up and fix it over here, to the point where even like my brother, who I built the music business with, he kind of just runs full speed. And it's fun because he does accomplish some great things. Then every once in a while, he has to ask me some like, like I might be like, come on, you should know that. So I feel like that. And then, yeah, I'm going to stick with that one. I was running through a couple other ones, but I think that one's a good one to stick with.
I like that one though. And I think you are the first person to make a reference to Ed, Ed, and Eddie. So that's something. I remember that show. I used to like it. Although I think my favorite character was probably Plank.
Plank, yeah, free, feel the wind, Plank. Yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite shows as a kid. That was probably like my favorite show when I was like very young, until like Dragon Ball Z. It was like that was like the first thing I really liked.
So, Dillon, just swinging us back into things here. How do you define procrastination, and what does it mean to you personally?
So I watched a really cool video that kind of broke down this duality between perfectionism and procrastination. Ever since, I always try to recommend it because it's a very cool idea to consider, where I really do believe that procrastination and perfectionism are very overlapped, in the sense that perfectionism is really just procrastination. It's this idea that, it's like, it's not quite where I want it to be. So but I'll finish it later. Like it's, I'm not where, maybe even if I do work on it, it doesn't get done right until the very end. So that's one side of the thing, of procrastination. And then the other one is I work better under pressure, where like, in the last 10 seconds, the ball's in my hand, I got to make the shot. And for whatever reason, I can make the shot. It's very interesting because when I heard those two ideas, I was like, they are different, but they're very much how I feel about procrastination. And one of the things that enlightened to me was the idea that if I think that I'm trying to make something perfect, which everybody knows nothing can be truly perfect, like without flaw at all, that in reality, all I'm doing is holding off on something that I need to accomplish. And something I learned over the last, I'll say 12 months, was that I'm, like I mentioned earlier, big reader, big planner, big strategizer. I'm always like, here's how you can build out this super mega campaign. And then I realized that the difference between these, billionaires and, 100 millionaires, and the people that were just very intelligent that I happen to know, or people that maybe even publicly have fame, but they're not super wealthy, was simply how much they executed. Right. It was really weird. Like, if you know who Alex Hormozy is, Alex Hormozy is admittedly, like he states this, that he's not that smart. All he does is out execute everybody. And the thing is that when you execute at rapid succession, you do become smart, like the street smart kind of smart. And eventually that will overlap into real intelligence once you can decipher what it is that you did to succeed. But I've noticed that over and over again, that there are super wealthy people that are seemingly normal. And it's because they are. The only difference is they executed more. And one of the things that really hit home was we recently signed an artist to our publishing company. And when we brought him on board, we invited him to our studios. We're chatting with him. And suddenly he tells me he has 3 businesses. And I'm like, what? And this guy's younger than me. He's like, he has 3 businesses. He sold one already and he's doing all this stuff. And I'm like, dang. And like, he knows that he wants my brain to do stuff for him. Like, he's like, I need your thoughts to do these things. But I'm like, yeah, but I need your action level to get my stuff done. So that's to me, procrastination has always been this, whether it's perfectionism because I'm trying to make something perfect or I'm planning to do something. That's really where a lot of my hiccups come in that aspect. So that's kind of the idea. And the biggest thing from that video I mentioned in the beginning was if you take somebody who, let's say you're painting something, so you paint one picture, right? So the perfectionist takes a week to paint it. And when they're done, they're about 95% to perfect. Again, you can never get perfect. And then you get person 2, who they paint once a day. And the first day, it's maybe 60% because you can get to 60% very quickly. But then tomorrow they do it again and they still get to 60%, but they've already done it once. So now they're better. So their 60% is of a larger pie. So the next day, again, now they've got 3 reps of this. Their 60% is larger than any of the previous days. And by the time they get to the 7th day, their 60% is better than that guy's 95% because they painted 7 times. That was hearing that and then watching all of these mega successful people that are like, average intelligence, they might be slightly smarter than average, but like they're definitely really close to average, succeed. It was just about executing more times. And so that's something that I've been implementing over this past year and reaping the rewards from it, greatly, which is awesome.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's definitely interesting to see how, just doing it and getting it out there and getting, again, just getting that 0.1% better every day. That's where mathematicians and engineers always argue, right? They have that joke where, what is it? You ask a mathematician and an engineer to reach a candy bar on a table or reach $1 million, whatever it is on the table that they want. $1 million option one is always fun. And they say that you can only go half the distance to the table every day. You can only close half the distance. The mathematician will give up because he says it's impossible. You never reach it because exponentially you'll get there, but you'll never reach the table. And the engineer says, well, for all intents and purposes, yeah, we'll do it because they know that as soon as you get close enough to the table to reach it with your arm, you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's funny because I think that's a good example of a perfectionist versus a practitioner. And like, that is the real difference is like, yeah, like it might not seem like you can do it, but you can. Coincidentally, I mentioned my brother and I were talking about a panel for like songwriters yesterday. And interestingly, that was the big thing he was saying was that you have to trust yourself enough to make the mistakes that need to be made to grow whatever it is you want to grow, whether it's a business, whether it's a skill, whether it's a family. It doesn't matter. Like you're going to make mistakes. You just have to trust that those mistakes won't be so like irreversible. And I mentioned Tim Ferriss earlier too. And Tim Ferriss I forgot what he called it, but he has some phrase for this. But the whole idea is that if you're ever like scared to do something because it's not going to be the best it could be, just go down a rabbit hole of what the most awful thing could be. And it's funny because at first you're like, why would I want to think so negatively? He's like, no. Double down. Like, oh my God, if I don't draw this picture perfectly, it's going to make an alien in space mad and they'll send an asteroid and kill us all. Like you can make it so exaggerated that eventually like, okay, like that's obviously ridiculous. In fact, even like the worst case scenario really is ridiculous. It's probably way closer to like a worst case scenario, halfway between actual reality worst case scenario and what I expected. It's probably only about halfway there that I could ever get, without the worst potential luck in the world. And because of that, it's like, okay, so the downside is actually much lower. And I have the courage to then take, action and hope I get the better side of that.
I like the way you look at that. Which actually brings me to an interesting question I have for you. We all know that everybody's different and there's perfectionism and then there's, executing, getting things done. What would you say is your secret sauce for getting over procrastination?
So I think the two things that I needed to do was one, although it's still planning, I realized that I need to like see it. Having stuff like checklists, like I've got a planner I use every day. It allows me to gather the small wins. There's a ton of things about that and habit forming and all that, but these small wins of going, okay, I moved a little bit more, because I think the other part of procrastination that's a problem is when you keep doing a bunch of work and then eventually you don't see something, and it's because you haven't released the things. You don't like, you're like, did I really do that much? And then you feel like you have to do even more. And then because you feel like you have to do more, you don't do anything because it's overwhelming. Right. So I think that by having the small checklist, breaking large goals into small goals is a huge deal. There's a book called The One Thing by Gary Keller, and it talks about asking this question, like, what's the one thing I could do such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary? And ideally you say, like, let's say I want to, I don't know, build a wall, right? So now I have this wall and that seems like a lot. Like, what could I do to make all of this easier or unnecessary? I could learn to lay bricks. I could watch a video. I could learn to mix cement. I could watch a video, or I could hire someone, right? Like it's asking yourself a question and then trying to figure out, like, how could I get because the second part of that, how can I make it easier or unnecessary? Hire somebody else. So for me, one of the biggest things that I did was I kept trying to get people to, like, so I do web development, Facebook ads, Google ads. I do a lot of things in marketing, and I'm very good at them to the point where I have been hired as a solo freelancer over an entire agency before, multiple times, right? And so this is something where I'm like, how do I replicate myself to do this? And then I realized that that's probably not going to happen the way I'm envisioning it. But what I could do is go, okay, what's something that wastes my time that I could offshore? I could get somebody to handle invoicing. That takes, 15 minutes to an hour, depending, but that's still time I could use to do something else. I could maybe have someone just looking at the ads. Like, I could set them up. I could get the audience built. I could, help with the creative. And maybe I can do that. Or maybe I can let somebody do the creative. I'm like, I know how to set up the ad. I don't want to do the creative. And I started realizing I could hand off parts of it initially until I felt comfortable enough to go, okay, and now you do it. And now I know that at least what I want done, and I can kind of move forward from there. So by trying to hand off little things as well. So it's like in my own stuff, it's doing the small wins so that I don't feel like I'm not making progress. And then when it comes to handling big projects and giving them off to somebody else so that I can do the more difficult tasks myself, because that's another big problem. It's like, you've got all these problems you have. Here's a really big one only you can solve, but you're like, yeah, but I have all these other things I got to get done, right? So getting those off of your plate by either eliminating, what is it? It's eliminate, automate, or delegate, right? Like, get them off of your plate. That allows me to then focus on these bigger rocks, because those bigger rocks are the scary ones. And one of the things, and this is part of procrastination to begin with, anything in our life that we would do that would result in a change to our life, our brain is afraid of. So we're like, yes, I want more money. It's like, but what does more money mean? More money. Maybe family members will bother me for my money. Maybe I'll end up, spending too much of it and then I'll lose my job. Or maybe I'll, there's all these other problems. And even if you don't think them out loud, that articulated, our brain is always thinking, will this affect how I survive? And there's this rule where once you hit the age of 25, anything you did to live up to that age, your brain is now solidified going, okay, all of that stuff kept me alive. Anything else is a threat to my existence. So anything new you want to try, whether it's as simple as, learning an instrument, your brain makes it so much more difficult because it might get you killed. And it's like such a silly thing. But once you understand that, you then have to basically trick your brain into going, oh no, I'm just messing around. It's okay. Like, don't worry about it. Like, we're just going this way. Don't worry. Like, there's no tigers over here. Like, let's keep moving. We'll worry about that after. It's like, you have to like constantly remind yourself that that's okay. And I know that because like I've gone through that. I've watched the big, like mega, wealthy, successful people. They don't say it like that, but they all say something like that. They all say something where like they were struggling to do this thing, they're struggling. And then there's that whole thing where it's, you finally can get over, what was it? When you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, that's when you finally push over the edge, because eventually you convince your brain that the thing you're actively doing is the thing killing you, right? And that's how you overcome that. But there's ways to kind of nudge that in a direction as opposed to having to go through like a midlife crisis or like what's it called, a near-death experience, or, losing a loved one, things like that. So there's other ways to get that to move without it being so aggressive.
No, you said a lot of things there that really hit a lot of interesting items to dig into. But I think the first one that you sort of touched on was the task list and wanting to feel like you're making progress and things like that. And I wanted to hear your take on this, because there's a camp right now that they're all about happiness, and they're about joy, and they're about not to-do lists, they're about to-be lists. And the way that they're advocating that you track your progress is not by how many things you've actually done. It's about how you are attaining that level to be. So in personal level, it would be, I want to be kind, and okay, what are 3 things I can do to do that, right? And then, or in your business, I want my business to be socially responsible. What are some ways that I can do that? In your line of work, in your opinion, do you advocate these to-be lists, or is it really important to have a to-do list?
So I would actually even run counter to at least that description of the to-be list, if that's truly, like, if that's really what they think. So there's a couple different thoughts I have on that. The first one is, if you want to be kind to others, right? So there's a difference between being nice and being like good, for example. Nice people, someone, it's like, hey, are you fat? It's like, no, you're fine. Whereas like, you could lose some weight. Like, I want you to live longer and be in my life, right? Now that might sound mean, but that's actually kinder to say, right? So a lot of people that they use the word kind or nice, they're using it in that context of like, oh, I want to be good. And it's like, well, there's the whole saying where evil prevails when good men do nothing. And the idea is that, just because you're being kind, it doesn't mean you're taking action against evil, which is what true goodness is. And people that chase happiness tend to be the ones starving for happiness. So for me, the 2 things I've discovered in my life that has made it so that, I'm in a gratitude room every morning, or not every morning, but as many mornings as I can be, Monday through Friday. A friend of mine's been running it for like 3 years now, I think. And one of the things that they talk about is that I'm always like the most happy-go-lucky person in there. And I've told them that my, secret to being happy is that I am content. I am grateful for what I have, not content. I am grateful for what I have. Because again, that book I mentioned earlier, I can't remember if it was before we went live, but Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, right? Because of that book and many other stories I know like that, I know that what I have is so much more than what it could be, that I am grateful for even the smallest stuff. In fact, when I hop on those calls, it's funny because they're always like, I'm grateful for this really awesome experience. And I'm like, I'm grateful for coffee today. You know what I mean? It's like, it's cloudy out, but I'm grateful it's cloudy out today, because that means maybe this weekend it might be sunny, right? It's like, it's one of those things where like you can be grateful for literally anything, and so that's the first part. Now, the problem with that is if you're only grateful, eventually you will become content, and people who are content will one day have regret. And so the second part that you need is progress towards something you desire. You don't even have to achieve the thing that you desire. You just need to be making progress towards it. For example, I'm practicing Portuguese because my wife's from Brazil and her whole family speaks Brazilian Portuguese. So I've been practicing for 3 years now. And even though I'm not fluent in it yet, even if I never become like truly fluent in it, I feel so great, like so much gratitude for the fact that I can communicate with them, even in the smallest amount that I can. And then I feel better that I'm also trying to do more. Now, the reason why those 2 things are so powerful in happiness is, one, being grateful for what you have just so that you're not sour. Like there's a lot of, we talk about millennials and what's after us? Not Gen Z. I forgot who's right after us. Is it Gen Z? I don't know. But
Maybe.
Whoever's millennials and younger, there's this idea of entitlement. And it's like, nobody owes you anything. This world isn't built for people to do stuff for you. The whole point is that if you want something, you have to work for it. And if you want something for someone you care about, you have to also work for it, right? You have to work for it, get something to be able to give it. That's why the 7 habits of highly effective people, it talks about the 3 habits of independence, so that you yourself basically are worth a damn to the people around you. And then you have the second set of 3 habits, which are the habits of interdependence, how to work well with others so that you are synergetic, which is the idea of 1 + 1 = 3, because you're adding things that are not just one, they are unique and that they can make much more because of it. And then the 7th habit is just sharpen the saw and get back to making sure you don't become ineffective. So that's kind of the idea. When people focus on stuff like happiness, it's like, I am not trying to be happy. I am happy as a result of progress towards things that I want in gratitude for what I already have. Those things create happiness without me having to make happiness. A good example of this, even on the physiological level, our body likes to create nitric oxide, and it opens up blood vessels to help with blood flow to your fingers, your toes, your organs, and it helps deliver nutrients throughout your body. But you can't eat nitric oxide and then have that same result. You eat nitrates, and then your body breaks them down and turns it into nitric oxide. So if you keep trying to get nitric oxide by eating nitric oxide, you're not doing anything. But if you eat the nitrates, you get the nitric oxide. So that's kind of the idea with happiness, is I feel like happiness is a result of other activities, not from chasing happiness. So the to-do list is the progress, and to-be list doesn't sound like progress. It sounds more like a reason to not make progress.
Oh, it's an interesting take for sure. And just going back to your comment on happiness and gratitude there, it is interesting, and, when we're happy or content. But I think that the biggest hurdle to happiness, now, I don't know if you agree or not, the biggest hurdle to happiness, as, I think that, Michael Singer probably said it best, is that we just put too many damn conditions on it. I'll be happy if I get this. I'll be happy if I get that. My coffee, but I mean, it's our nature. We want to complain, You get that coffee. I'm grateful I have coffee. You take a sip. Oh, damn, it's too bitter. Where's my sugar? Man, I'm missing the sugar. Where do you stand on that about, conditions and.
So another solid book on this one is Solve for Happy by Mo Gaudet. And he is the chief business officer of Google X. Google X is the company that made the self-driving car 15 years ago. This is the idea that this company basically invented like tons of crazy stuff. So this is a guy who his whole life, a freak in the positive sense. This guy, when he was from the age of like 5, every time he had a problem, he went to his local library, found 3 books on the subject and read them, right? This guy ended up working, obviously, Google X, living in Dubai, doing well for himself. And then one day he realized he had a problem. He wasn't happy. And he goes, how do I solve this? Well, yeah, just like every other problem, I'm going to go to the library, find 3 to 5 books and see if I can solve it. What ended up happening, because obviously it's called Solve for Happy, it's very mathematical. This guy's an engineer, is that he realized that there are things in life that prevent us from being happy, but it can all be broken down into a single equation. And then we just figure out how to fix our equation. So that equation is happiness is when what you expect from life is less than or equal to what life gives you, right? And the reverse way would be if what life gives you is greater than or equal to what you expected, right? So that is it for happiness. As long as you get more or exactly what you expected, you feel happy. That's the whole thing. Like you go to taste the coffee and it's bitter. That's because you didn't expect it to be bitter. But if you expected it to taste like dirt and then you taste it, you're like, oh, it's not bad, right? Like that's the idea, is that, there's people like there's a funny company that they did this brilliant. They call their coffee mud, and it's made out of like mushrooms and stuff. But think about it. You get a coffee called mud. You know it's supposed to be healthy. You're expecting it to taste a little earthy, and then you taste it and you're like, holy crap, that tastes like Folgers. What? Right? Like all of a sudden it tastes incredible, even if you hate Folgers. Like, you know what I mean? Like it could be this idea where because of what you expected, it tasted better. And the best example of this is that there have been dozens of studies on this where they give people wine to taste, and when they tell them it costs more, they think it tastes better. Even if they make them taste the same wine back to back to back, they just tell them it's a different one. And if you scanned their brain with an fMRI, you would literally see that they are enjoying it more. So that means that our happiness is completely controlled by our perception of reality. So the rest of the book talks about basically how to overcome that. Like one of them is I think the first part is like identifying oneself. So it's like, are you your body? If you lose your arm, are you 10% less yourself? No, right? Are you your brain? Well, maybe, but you could also think about what you think about. So who's the observer of the brain, right? There's this kind of idea where, there's multiple levels of this, but the idea is it's this inner self that we don't know how to identify. But that there's just this myth about self. So like when people think, different parts about them make them that, like their physiology, it's like, well, obviously if you lose an arm and that doesn't change it, why would what you're made of right now change it? Right. So that's like the first thing. So there's like a first level. The second level is things like labels. So it's like the different types of labels we use. It could be labels on people, on things, on actions, etc. And I think there's like more to that. I can't remember offhand, but the final part even dives into what he calls the 5 truths, which I won't go into that. I highly recommend reading the book because it's very, very deep when it gets to that point. And the reason why is the reason he wrote the book, right? Because he didn't write other books. The reason he wrote this book was he did learn how to be happy. And then one day his son was in the US studying, some, I'll say engineering or something. He's in Dubai. His son's there. He's like, oh, I want to come home and visit. I haven't seen you guys in a while. So he comes home and he goes, hey, my stomach's been bothering me. We go to our doctors here. Like, I'm way better anyways. And he goes to the doctors and he was going to get something, I'll say like a colonoscopy. I don't know what it was, but something that required air to be injected into his stomach. And then what happened was, the nurse accidentally nicked a vein, put oxygen in the vein, blood clot to the brain, killed his 21-year-old son. Now, this guy has to figure out how to be happy again. And so he put that to the test. And he ended up writing this book with the goal of making, I think it was either 1 million or 10 million people slightly more happy. If that's all he could do. And that's why he wrote the book, was he was like, how do I really take this and determine how to use this? And that's where he came up with those other things like the truths, the labels, and the self. So it's, like I said, the last 5 parts are very deep. So I figured I'd share that, but you should read what they are. And it's, it'll make you think about stuff and question stuff you haven't thought about. You're like, wow, that's like really, really powerful stuff. So that's kind of, like I said, just the chasing happiness part. It's like, when you expect stuff from life, that's what's removing your happiness. So for me, it's like, I do a ton of work. I don't help people, for the sake of helping them. Like if I have clients and they're paying me to help them, I don't expect them to have to stay around. I'm going to try to give them as best results as I can. And because of that, coincidentally, I didn't charge enough in the beginning until eventually people are like, I need to pay you more. And it's like, I don't have the time. I got too many clients. Like, how much do I need to pay you to have my time? I'm like, well, I would need all these bills paid. So I guess this amount were like sold. And I'm like, holy crap. Like it was that easy. And now I can ask for much more than what I thought I could ask for, because I am now saving them much more value than I'm saving myself, right? I'm even though I feel like I'm not providing enough, I am saving them enormous amounts of time and frustration and hassle, to the point where if they have the money, it is not a hassle for them to just exchange cash. It's in the beginning, you might feel like you get the short end of the stick. I never did. But the point was that because I never did, when I did get the reward, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I wasn't like, well, finally, so it's definitely something that, expectation kills happiness.
It's quite a dichotomy that we have to hang on to, right? Because incidentally, I think that's why human beings are so conflicted and upset sometimes, because we are, as a species, we can hold 2 completely opposing things and know them both to be true at the same time.
Yeah. The interesting thing about that is that, so another random book, Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, is an excellent book. This guy is a journalist, I believe. And because of that, he could write very well. And he ended up going on this journey himself. So it is a nonfiction book, and it's following him. And people know about the sport of ultra running, like from this kind of thing. Like there's a famous guy, Barefoot Ted, that's in the sport, and he's known because of this book. There's what's his name? Caballo Blanco, something like that. Right? Horse, yeah, Caballo Blanco, the white horse. This white guy who was an ultra runner who ended up hanging out with the Tarahumara Indians of Mexico in Copper Canyon, I believe. One of the things that it's so funny, because most of the book is like a story, and then there's like this one chapter that's very scientific. And from that, I got so much more because of this ancillary knowledge, like these other pieces of information that I was able to overlap on this. So essentially, the whole idea is that Homo sapiens sapiens, so our human race, ended up out-surviving Homo neanderthals, and we're not quite sure why. But one of the hypotheses, and I really believe this one to be the one, is that during the Ice Age, there was very limited vegetation. So when you have giant woolly mammoths and boars and things that we could hunt to eat, they had to go to where the vegetation was. So there's only one spot. So you get Homo neanderthals, which were larger than us, stronger than us, likely faster than us, and their brains were probably bigger than ours, meaning they were probably smarter than us. And somehow we outsurvived them. So what happens is during the Ice Age, they could just get 7 of their guys and fight a woolly mammoth, which is crazy. One of them might die, but now they got food for an entire village. So then the Ice Age is ending. The fields are opening up, and now there's these large fields of grass. And so now you need to hunt down an antelope. This thing's running around like crazy. You just can't chase it. You're not going to be able to catch it. It's way faster than us and faster than Homo neanderthals. So interestingly, the only species on Earth that has this particular trait is Homo sapiens sapiens, which is that we are persistent hunters, persistence hunters, meaning that we can literally hunt something to exhaustion. So there's a singular tribe in Africa that still does this to this date. So we know that it's physically possible, but it's assumed that this is actually how we typically hunted our prey, because we found prey where there was no damage to the bones from spears or arrows. And yet they were clearly eaten by people because of where they were gathered. And so what we do is we literally get a group of us and we run the animal down. It sprints super far away. It stops to pant. And then we continue running this whole time. We catch up to it. It runs away on repeat until eventually it passes out from exhaustion and we can walk right up to it and get it. And again, another similar thing, there's a race that's run. It used to be, I think it's like every X number of years. I don't know if it's still run. Men on horseback would race men on foot, right? But the race was so long that the men on foot always won, because the horses eventually had to stop. And that's what is so cool about the humans, is that we have this ability to run forever. Simple things like the Achilles tendon in our foot, that is one of the most elastic substances in the world. Fluid in our knees, which is one of the most lubricating, I think it's the most lubricating substance in the world. I don't think we've found something more than that. And the way that our tendon, I think it's tendons on our neck, allow us to stabilize while we run, and that we run upright. Like weird stuff, like when a cheetah runs and it sprints forward, when it lands with its front feet, all of its organs come forward, so it pushes the air out. So then when it extends again, it can breathe in. So that means it can only breathe in the pattern of its run, where humans can breathe however we want because we stand vertical. So there's tons of these cool, like weird scientific reasons why we can run forever. The fact that we sweat instead of panting to cool down, like tons of cool stuff. So interestingly enough, all of this came down to our brain is designed to do 2 things: keep us alive and conserve energy for when it needs to keep us alive. And the reason why keep us alive is a very powerful thing. It is running from the tigers and running towards the gazelles, right? Pain, pleasure. And so everything in life is save energy for when I need to run. And once you kind of realize that, and it's really cool too, because again, it's one of those things I keep seeing over and over again. And so I share this a lot now, is anybody who has accomplished something great has just convinced themselves that the thing that they're chasing is the gazelle and the lack of it is the tiger. That's all that we've had to do, is just persuade ourselves that that's the case. And the reason why I see it that way is that if you look at first world nations are always fatter than second and third world nations. Why? It's not just because we have more food, because we also should have more time to work out, right? We should have more resources to be healthy. But for some reason, we get fatter. And the reason why is because we have no tiger to chase, or no gazelle to chase and no tiger to run from. So our body goes into default conserve energy mode, right? And this is true throughout our whole life. Once you hit the age of, I think it's like 27 or 28, the calcium deposited to your bones slows down and it starts to actually leach out, unless you weightlift, right? If you weightlift, you cause microfractures, telling your body, we're still using those bones, send the energy that way, because I might die if those bones are brittle. But the irony of it is, if you don't use them, it makes them brittle. And it's because, and that's the same thing with like Alzheimer's. For example, Alzheimer's and dementia. If you are bilingual or a polyglot, you have something like a 70% reduction in those disorders, which is interesting. It's almost like your brain is requiring more energy because you have to translate, and therefore you can't conserve energy right now, because if you don't translate, then you can't be part of the community. If you're not part of the community, you'll die, right? So it's all of these things that relate to those two things. And so eventually that's kind of the driving factor. I think Tom Bilyeu had a good example. He said, 80% of the time I'm chasing a dream, 20% of the time I'm telling F you to those people said I couldn't. Right. So you don't want to always be running from a tiger. That's stress on the heart. You get a heart attack one day, right? But if you're chasing the gazelle, that's much more rewarding when you get that gazelle, as opposed to getting away from the tiger. That doesn't feel as rewarding. Yeah, it just feels like, oh, finally that's over. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts on the human psyche. The reason why we find stuff to complain about in a first world is there's no tiger to run from. So our brain makes up tigers, right? Anybody who thinks that you're not living in the absolute greatest time ever, and think that something today is worse than it was 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, you are out of your mind. Out of your mind. Specifically, if you live in the United States, you're out of your mind. I hear people in the United States that say this thing and that thing is like stopping somebody from succeeding. I'm like, I got a friend in Nigeria who had no electricity and no internet, work his butt off to buy a generator so he could have electricity. He then worked his butt off to get a computer. And then we worked his butt off to be able to pay for like 50 megabytes up and down, like per month, like kind of thing. Not like, speed. It was like, that's all he could deliver. And eventually he built a business online doing like voice. Like, that's crazy to me. This guy was dirt poor in one of the poorest countries on the planet Earth. And this guy figured out how to get to the internet and start making money online. I already told him if I ever make enough money, I'll fly him out here, because that is a story where like when people think that life's putting them down, like you have no idea. There are people way, way, way worse off than you. Your brain, once you are in a state of contentness, decides to make up enemies. It makes up tigers. And it's a super interesting thing to like watch that happen.
Well, it is certainly a lot to think about as well. Dillon, this has been a really wonderful conversation, a lot of interesting thoughts. We are coming up pretty close to the time. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked but didn't ask, or anything that you feel we should have covered but we didn't cover today?
So maybe the one subject might be, so in procrastination, sometimes people procrastinate because they don't know what they want. Like that would be another reason people procrastinate. So they might feel lost in their journey to whatever it is that they're heading towards, or they don't know what they're heading towards. And I think that that's also another form of procrastination, is doing nothing because nothing is supposed to be done. Like I'm not in school, I'm just doing the things. One of the things that I like to talk about is Gary Vaynerchuk said this very well. And I love this idea because I never thought about it this way. And I'm like, yeah, that actually makes perfect sense. Because another one, Tom Bilyeu, I had mentioned him earlier too, just because this overlaps the same thought, is he has this thing called what does he call it? The 25 beliefs of impactivists, I think he calls it. And the impactivists are just like his followers, because he has a YouTube channel called Impact Theory. And it's something like belief number 5, that absolutely anything that you can conceive of, you can achieve. And then it's like rule number 7 is number 5 was a lie, but it's an empowering lie. And we only believe that which moves us closer to our goal, right? Because there's this other idea that if you knew how hard it was going to be to get your goal, you may never have started. So instead, it's like only believe that which will move you towards your goal. So that Gary Vaynerchuk thing was, some people are worried, like, what if I'm a doctor? What if I'm a lawyer? What if I'm a this? And if you really, really, really don't know, just pick one. And there's 2 reasons why. One, if you just pick one and start moving forward, you might realize like, oh, I don't like this. And then you can pick another one. But if you don't start, you'll never get to the point where you can figure out you don't like it. Now, let's say you go through it and you do like it, but you're like, man, but what if I was a lawyer? Well, this is what Gary says, and I love this idea. You don't know that if being a lawyer, you might have ended up in New York City one day for a court hearing, crossing the street and get hit by a bus. You have no idea what other trajectory that might have led to. You might have not found your wife. You might not have had kids. You might not have had whatever it is that is in your life that isn't this singular thing. It could be so drastically different. There's no reason to even wonder what it would have been. It is a waste of time and energy. And if your brain really wants to be a lawyer, I know people that have gone to law school in their 40s. Do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't be like, oh, I don't know. Like my cousin of mine, his mom ended up going to nursing school at 40. And now she still does that. Like you don't have, like, it's not like, oh no, I should have done that. It's like, if your brain is really wanting it, just do it. But if not, don't be worried that you didn't do it. So because of that, like I said, from the very beginning, before you've done it, some people just don't know what to do. And so because of that, they procrastinate, they do nothing. But do something. acquire any skill, draw, learn coding, learn, I don't know, photography. It doesn't matter. Learn some random skill. Gary Vee, I think, says something like, just toy around with interest, like go into something and see if it captures your interest a little longer than normal, because there's this idea that you're supposed to just have this innate passion to move towards something. But there's this great book, So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. And that quote is from Steve Martin, where the goal was, if you want to be noticed, you have to become so good they can't ignore you. And the idea was that we do not have this innate passion in us. We have interests in us, right? Because you can't be born interested in computers. That doesn't make any sense, right? Have you ever seen a baby just pick up a laptop and start typing? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? They might think it's fun to press buttons, but they definitely didn't type a sentence. So the whole idea is that we build our passions from interests that we have, right? Like, maybe I have an interest in building, but that's very broad. I was an engineer and then I learned to be a computer programmer. Both of those things satisfy that interest of building, right? So there's some interest that we have, and then you basically just play with something that might get you closer to finding out, like, oh, is this it? And then once you become good enough at it that you're like, wow, I'm skilled in this, you have now built a passion for it, right? And if not, you now know, okay, time to pivot. Like for me, I got really good at web development, and then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? This is a really cool skill to have, but I am definitely not passionate about web development. But I am passionate about building, and I like building businesses. So like, that's the reason why I've gotten into so many different ventures, is that it's just, that's the part that's fun, working with people. The programming part was cool, but that's because I couldn't find a programmer. So I'm like, screw it, I'll build it, right? But at least I acquired a skill, and that has gotten me job opportunities just to get my foot in the door. And I go, by the way, I also do Facebook ads. I like that, right? And all of a sudden I have these new opportunities because of a skill I only learned to get over some problem I had. So that would be the one other topic would be, yeah, like if you're procrastinating because you don't have something to do, just do something.
I like that one. It's it's a pretty powerful note to end the show on. So thank you for that, Dillon. Yeah, if you don't know what to do, just do something, and it'll either be right or wrong. So there you go.
And if you really don't know, ask ChatGPT. What
Ooh,
should I
don't get me
do,
started.
Master Robot?
I don't think I want to go into that one just yet. But once again, Dillon, thank you so much for being on the show. Just before we go, what's the best way for our listeners to reach out to you in case they want to have a chat or ask questions, or maybe
So
get
I
some?
have a lot of different places. If you want to like message me, Instagram, it's just my name, Dillon Mysliwiec. I also have a website, dillonmysliwiec.com, where I have all of my adventures and all of their social platforms on there. So my music, comics, and my marketing business. So those are probably the two best places to get all of me.
Excellent. And to our listeners, don't worry about grabbing a pen and paper. We are going to have that in the show notes for you, so it's easy for you to find. Once again, Dillon, thank you so much for the conversation. It was really, really enlightening. Really enjoyed it. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.